The call came at 2:47 in the morning, and I know the exact time because I had just checked my phone to see if my husband had texted back. He hadn't. The officer on the line was calm in that practiced way that made everything worse. He said there had been an accident on the 401 near Milton. He said my sister was in surgery at Halton Healthcare. He said I should come as soon as I could. I grabbed my coat off the hook by the door, shoved my feet into whatever shoes were nearest, and drove 40 minutes in the dark without once turning on the radio. The whole way there, I kept thinking, she's going to be fine. She's always fine. My sister Ingrid has been the toughest person I know since we were kids sharing a bunk bed in our parents' house in Brampton. She once broke her wrist in gym class and walked herself to the office. She doesn't fall apart. She doesn't let things take her down. What I wasn't prepared for was walking into that waiting room and seeing my parents already there. My mother, with her arms crossed over her chest, and my father standing by the window with his back to the room, and realizing, from the way neither of them looked at me when I walked in, that something had already shifted. Something had already been decided without me. My sister Ingrid was 31. She was a project coordinator for a civil engineering firm in Mississauga, recently separated from her partner of 4 years, and 7 months pregnant with her daughter. She had been driving home from a late dinner with a friend when a transport truck drifted into her lane on the highway. The collision pushed her car into the guardrail. By some miracle, both she and the baby survived. By an even greater miracle, the baby came early but strong, delivered by emergency C-section, while Ingrid was still unconscious, 4 pounds and 9 ounces, and screaming her lungs out. I didn't know any of this yet when I sat down beside my mother in those orange plastic waiting room chairs and asked her what was happening. She said, "She's stable now. The baby is in the NICU." I said, "Okay, what do we do?" My mother looked at her hands. "Your father and I have been talking." I waited. "We're not in a position to take the baby. Not right now. We're too old for that, and with your father's back, and my hours at work, it's not realistic." I remember the exact quality of the silence in that room, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the sound of a vending machine down the hall clicking on. I thought I had misunderstood her. "No one's asking you to take the baby permanently," I said. "Ingrid is going to recover. They don't know that yet." My mother's voice was flat, careful, like she had rehearsed it. "And until they do, someone has to make practical decisions. We cannot be responsible for an infant, Petra. We're 64 years old. My name is Petra. I'm 34. I'm a dental hygienist in Oakville. And at the time, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment near the lake with my then husband, Warren, who was. I understand this now, though I didn't fully understand it then. Already halfway out the door of our marriage and looking for a reason to leave the rest of the way. I stared at my mother and said, "Then I'll take her." My mother said, "You don't have room. I'll make room. Warren won't agree to it. Warren doesn't get a vote." She looked at me then, finally, and the expression on her face wasn't relief. It wasn't gratitude. It was something quieter and harder, like she was calculating something, like she was checking a box. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the NICU and watched my niece breathe through a tangle of wires and monitors, her chest rising and falling, her fingers the size of my thumbnail. The nurses had put a tiny knitted hat on her head, yellow with a small flower at the side. I held her hand through the porthole of the incubator, and I made her a promise I had absolutely no plan for yet. Ingrid remained unconscious for 11 days. In those 11 days, I moved her daughter, whom I named Ren, temporarily, for reasons I couldn't fully explain because the name just came to me in that NICU room and it felt right, and the nurses needed something to put on the chart, into my apartment. I bought a secondhand bassinet off Facebook Marketplace. I borrowed a baby monitor from my friend Deb at work. I called in favors and rearranged my schedule and went on 4 hours of sleep for 11 days straight, and through all of it, Warren said almost nothing. He wasn't cruel. I want to be fair about that. He just went very quiet in a way that meant he had already checked out and was only staying, because leaving during a family crisis would have made him look bad. He helped with night feeds twice. He held Ren once, briefly, like she was something he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. He ordered a lot of takeout and watched television in the other room and asked me, on day 9, whether I had thought about what happens next. I said, "I'm keeping Ren until Ingrid recovers." He said, "And if Ingrid doesn't recover the way you're expecting?" I said, "She will." He said, "Petra." I said, "She will, Warren." He didn't push it. But that night, when I got up for the 2 a.m. feed, his side of the bed was cold. He had slept on the couch, and something in me registered that as the beginning of an ending, even if I wasn't ready to name it yet. On the 12th day, Ingrid opened her eyes. She had a long road ahead. A fractured pelvis, a head injury that would take months of rehab, a left hand that would never work quite right again. But she was awake. She was Ingrid. The first thing she said when I walked into her room and she saw me was, "Where's the baby?" "She's with me," I said. "She's good. She's 4 pounds 12 ounces now and she's mad at everybody, which means she's going to be exactly like you." Ingrid cried. I cried. The nurse who came to check vitals pretended not to notice. What I didn't tell Ingrid yet was what had happened in the margins. I didn't tell her that our parents had called me on day 3 to ask if I had reconsidered the logistics. I didn't tell her that Warren had started spending evenings at his gym buddy Derek's place, coming home after I was already asleep. I didn't tell her that I had started to notice, in small ways, that the story didn't quite add up. It started with something minor. On day 6, I found a text on Warren's phone, not from snooping, from pure accident, because his phone lit up on the counter while I was making a bottle and the preview showed enough. The name was a woman I didn't recognize. The message was short. It said, "Wednesday still works. Don't stress about her. She has enough going on." I put the phone down. I made the bottle. I fed Ren and put her back in the bassinet and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time, turning that message over and over. I want to be honest about what I did next, because I think it matters. I didn't confront him. I wasn't ready to, and frankly I had a newborn and a sister in a rehab hospital and approximately zero bandwidth for a marital crisis. I just started paying attention. And once I started paying attention, I couldn't stop. The gym buddy whose name he kept using, Derek. I had met Derek twice at Warren's work Christmas party. Nice guy, young, very chatty. So I did something I'm not proud of. I looked Derek up on Instagram, and Derek had posted a story 3 days earlier, a group dinner at a restaurant in Toronto. Warren was not in it. I checked Warren's mileage on the car. He had put nearly 300 kilometers on it in the past 2 weeks. Mostly on evenings, he said he was staying local. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, not snooping, just checking for parking stubs like I always do before laundry, for a hotel in Burlington, 2 nights. A month earlier, we hadn't taken any trips together in over a year. I sat with all of this for another week. I let it settle like sediment, and then, on a Sunday afternoon when Warren was out and Ren was asleep and the apartment was quiet, I called my grandfather. My grandfather, I've always called him Gramps, is 79 years old and lives in a seniors townhouse complex in Cambridge, Ontario, about an hour west of where I was. He came to Canada from Barbados in 1971, worked 30 years at a manufacturing plant in Hamilton, and is the single most level-headed person I have ever known in my life. He survived my grandmother dying young, raised my mother and her brother largely on his own, and once mediated a property dispute between 2 neighbors on his street by inviting them both over for rum cake and refusing to let anyone leave until the thing was settled. He is not a person who panics. He is not a person who tells you what you want to hear. He is the person I call when I need to know what is actually true. I told him everything. All of it, in order, from the night of the accident to the text on Warren's phone to the hotel receipt, to the fact that my parents had, within 48 hours of their daughter's near death, concluded that her infant was not their problem. Gramps was quiet for a long time after I finished. That's his way, he doesn't fill silence just to fill it. Finally he said, "You're carrying a lot, Petra." I said, "I know, the baby's okay?" "She's good. She's really good." Another pause. Then, "I want to come." He arrived on a Tuesday, driving himself, which I had told him not to do, and which he did anyway, because he is 79, and has driven himself everywhere his whole life and has no intention of stopping. He pulled up to my building in his old Buick with a casserole in the back seat and a canvas bag full of things he thought a baby might need, most of which were completely wrong in an endearing way, including a toy meant for a 2-year-old and a package of infant Tylenol he had clearly bought decades ago. I cried when I saw him. I hadn't cried in days, I had been too busy, and seeing him standing in my parking lot holding a casserole dish just broke something loose in me. He held Ren for 3 hours that first evening. He sat in my armchair with her on his chest and watched her sleep with an expression I can only describe as absolute seriousness, like she was the most important thing he had ever been trusted with, and maybe she was. He also very quietly and over several conversations helped me see what I had not been letting myself see. "This accident," he said on the second evening, after Ren was down and I had made us both tea. "The transport truck, has anyone looked into it properly?" I said I assumed the police had filed a report. "Your sister was driving home from dinner, on the 401, in decent weather from what you've described, a truck drifting fully into her lane, that's not nothing. Has anyone spoken to a lawyer?" I hadn't. It hadn't even occurred to me. because I had been so consumed with immediate survival that I hadn't thought about what had actually happened to her, or why, or whether there was more to it. "And this husband of yours," Gramps said. Not accusatory, just steady. "How long have things been off?" I told him about the texts, the receipts, the mileage. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Here's what I think. I think you need a lawyer, one for the accident, one for yourself. And I think you need to talk to your sister before anyone else does." I asked him what he meant by anyone else. He looked at me in that way he has, where he doesn't say the hard thing directly, but he holds space for you to get there yourself. "Your parents called me," he said. 2 days ago." I put my mug down. "They wanted to know if I had heard about your grandmother's insurance policy." My grandmother, Gramps' wife, who died when my mother was 19, had left a modest life insurance policy that had, over the decades, been held in a kind of family trust that nobody had ever done much with. I knew it existed vaguely the way you know about old family documents. I had never thought about it. I didn't know what it was worth. Gramps told me. I won't give the exact number, but it was enough, more than enough. Enough that I understood, immediately and completely, why my parents had been so quick to calculate what they could and couldn't manage. Enough that I understood why they had not been asking about Ingrid's recovery so much as about the timeline. The policy had a clause. If Ingrid were deemed medically incapable for a sustained period, next of kin could petition to have certain assets managed on her behalf. My parents, as her parents, would have standing to do this. As her sister, I would too. But only if I moved fast. "They called you to see if you knew," I said. "It wasn't a question," Gramps said. "They called me to see if I would stay out of it." I sat there for a long time. I thought about my mother's voice in that hospital waiting room, the flatness of it, the calculation. I thought about my father standing at the window with his back to the room, and how I had interpreted that as grief, when maybe it was something else entirely. I thought about Warren, who had gone very quiet precisely when things got complicated, and who had been somewhere he wouldn't tell me on a Tuesday night, and whose silences had started to feel less like absence and more like strategy. I called a lawyer the next morning. Gramps came with me. The lawyer was a woman in her 50s with an office above a pharmacy in Oakville, and she had the particular quality that good lawyers often have, of making you feel like the most catastrophic thing you've ever described is, actually, a completely manageable set of circumstances. She listened to everything. She asked sharp questions. She told me that yes, I had standing as Ren's temporary caregiver to establish certain legal protections, and yes, I should move on that quickly. And yet, the circumstances of the accident were worth looking into, because transport truck incidents on the 401 with clear weather were exactly the kind of thing insurers and accident investigators took seriously. She also said, carefully, professionally, that if there were any indication that my sister had been in a vulnerable financial position recently, or that anyone close to her had reason to benefit from her incapacitation, that information should be on the record. I drove home with Gramps and put Ren down for her nap and sat at the kitchen table trying to remember everything Ingrid had told me in the months before the accident. She had told me, back in the spring, that her ex-partner had been pushing her to settle things quickly. She had told me he had become hostile when she mentioned the pregnancy. She had told me there was some dispute about the condo they had shared, who owned what they were each entitled to, and that her lawyer was handling it. She had told me she was stressed and tired and couldn't wait for it to be over. And she had told me, in passing, in the way you tell someone something you're trying to convince yourself is not a big deal, that her ex had friends, that he knew people, that he had made a comment once when she had pushed back on something that had made her feel, just briefly, like she should be careful. I had told her she was being paranoid. I had said it kindly, I think, but I had said it. I went to see Ingrid that afternoon. Gramps stayed with Ren. I sat in Ingrid's rehab room with the blinds half open, and the afternoon light coming in at an angle, and I told her everything I had found out, all of it. The insurance policy, our parents' call to Gramps, Warren's receipts and his silences and the message on his phone, and I told her what I hadn't told her before, the comment her ex had made, the feeling she had said she'd had. Ingrid lay there and listened. She was still in pain, her hand was in a brace, but her eyes were clear and she had the expression she gets when she is doing math in her head. Quiet and focused and building something, she said, I need you to call my lawyer, the one handling the condo situation. Tell her I need to see her this week, I said. Already on it. She almost smiled. What came out over the following weeks was not dramatic the way it is in movies. There was no single moment of confrontation where everything collapsed at once. It was slower than that, and quieter, and in some ways harder because of it. The accident investigation was reopened. The transport truck driver had a route irregularity that hadn't been properly flagged in the initial report. There were questions about whether the truck had been maintained correctly, about whether someone had known Ingrid's driving route and her habits, about the timing. Her ex-partner was interviewed. It is an ongoing matter, and I cannot say more than that, except that the conversation I had with the police felt very different from the one I had expected to have. My parents did not get what they had been angling for. Ingrid's lawyer moved quickly, and I had moved quickly, and between the two of us and Gramps' clear accounting of who had called him and when and why, the picture my parents had been trying to assemble quietly came apart. My mother called me twice to explain herself. I let it go to voicemail both times. My father sent an email that said, essentially, that they had only been thinking of the family's best interests, and that I had misunderstood their intentions, and that they hoped we could put this behind us. I haven't responded yet. Warren left in November. He told me, with the practiced kindness of someone who has rehearsed a speech, that he thought we had grown apart, and that it wasn't anyone's fault, and that he hoped we could be civil. He said he had met someone, and that it had started as a friendship, and become something more. I told him I appreciated his honesty, and asked him to have his things out by the end of the month. He seemed surprised I wasn't more upset. The truth is, I had been grieving the marriage for long enough that the official end of it felt more like resolution than loss. He was out by the 28th. The apartment was quiet for about 4 minutes, and then Ren woke up from her nap screaming, and I went to get her and held her by the window, and told her she was going to be just fine. Ingrid was discharged from rehab in January. She's been living with me since then. My 1-bedroom became a 2-bedroom when we converted the office into a proper nursery, and it is genuinely ridiculous how much space an infant requires for how small she is, but we have made it work. Ingrid is in outpatient physiotherapy 3 times a week. Her hand is not going to be what it was, but she is adapting. She has learned to do most things differently, and she does them. That's who she is. Ren is 7 months old now. She has Ingrid's stubborn chin and what I'm fairly sure are my grandmother's eyes, dark and bright and watching everything. She has learned to roll onto her stomach and back again, and seems extremely pleased with herself about it. She makes a sound like a small, determined seal whenever she's hungry. The nurses in the NICU who put the yellow hat on her head would not recognize the solid, fierce little person she has become. Gramps comes every other Sunday. He takes the highway from Cambridge, drives himself, parks his old Buick in the visitor spot, and comes upstairs with whatever he has decided to bring that week. Food, usually, and occasionally something entirely inexplicable, like a picture book about trains or a set of measuring spoons. He sits in the armchair and holds Ren and tells her things in a low voice that I can't always make out. Stories, I think, the same kind he used to tell me and Ingrid when we were small, about his mother's house in Bridgetown and the mango tree in the yard, and the way the rain sounded on a corrugated roof. I asked him once, a few months ago, what he told her. He said, I tell her she's going to be okay, and that the people who love her are right here, and that's enough to know. I thought about that for a long time, about how simple it sounds and how hard it is to believe when things fall apart, and how having even one person say it clearly and mean it, not as comfort but as fact, can be the thing that holds you together until you can hold yourself. My name is Petra. I'm 34 years old. I live in Oakville, Ontario, with my sister and her daughter, and we are figuring it out day by day.
There are things I still don't know.
How the investigation will end, what my parents and I will ever be to each other again, whether Ingrid's ex will ever face what I believe he deserves to face. I have stopped waiting for a clean resolution. Life doesn't tend to work that way. What I do know is this. When the call came at 2:47 in the morning, and everything I thought I understood about my family turned out to be something different, the person who showed up for us was a 79-year-old man in a Buick with a casserole, and a toy meant for a 2-year-old. And sometimes that's exactly what love looks like.